All right, so that's wrapping up the Scottish referendum. There's a good video here to dig into it just a bit more. It gives you a very step-by-step process with some good imagery to go along with it. So check that out. It'll be, I think I'll put it right above this video so that this one will kind of split the next section, which will be a good bit larger, and that will be dealing with Brexit. So Brexit, what is it? So for a good 40, I think 47 years, the UK, here in the Union Jack colors, has been a member of the European Union. The European Union is a conglomeration of the many countries of Europe, not all of them, but a good many of them, or most of them, and it allows free trade, a lot of economic cooperation, and free movement of people. So if you're in the UK and you want to retire to Spain, it makes it very easy to do so. It also makes it very easy to work in other countries. And so that's been the way it has been for a while, but over time, there's been a growing uh, discontentment among a certain section of the British population that it was costing them more than it was worth to be part of the EU. There are a lot of restrictions that come along with it. They felt that they were receiving too many immigrants that they didn't want in the country, or were burning through resources. There've been any number of arguments. And so that is what they're working towards here, is trying to find a way to get out of the EU, at least some in the UK. And so this got started in, say, 2013, and it took until June of 2016 to get a referendum together on it. And it was just an incredibly loud campaign, one of those that is just people they really can't do anything else but just be inundated by debates about it and information about it and all that. So, and it got pretty ugly with people, starting to call each other racist, or giving up their country, and it was just a real attack campaign kind of campaign, and it got to the point where it was difficult for people to be able to tell what if any information that they were receiving was actually true. Like, they didn't know who to believe on anything, really. It was a real challenge to figure that out. Oh, here's a bit more on the EU. I meant to mention that. Um, so Britain joined in 73, minus the euro. So a lot of the different countries here, and you can look at the video here from CGP Grey, that will give you a bit more information and show you the complexity of it. But most of the countries are typical members. A few countries are part of the EU, but have special allowances, I guess the right word would be, so the UK was part of the EU, but they didn't use the euro as their currency. They used the British pound, and there's some other differences for like Nordic countries and some different things. So, but it is a single market, both economic, political. 28 countries involved. Currency is the euro. And the background to this election. So the UK Independence Party, it forms in the 90s. And just like any of these many, many smaller parties that you saw earlier in the videos for this class, you can know that there are plenty. And so another random little party starting up doesn't mean that much to the country as a whole. Most people just ignore it. They might know the name. And so these are called UKIP, the UK Independence Party. They formed in 1993, but will slowly, over the 90s and the rest, up to recent times, have been growing in strength. They've been campaigning for years to leave Britain, or for Britain to leave the EU. And when they reached a certain point in, I forgot what year it was. It was around 2013. They got about 13% of the vote in a general election. And when that happened, about half of the Conservative Party members joined them. Like I said, these parties kind of interweave occasionally to achieve certain goals. About half of the Conservative MPs, plus a few folks from other parties, joined with them to call for a referendum. And so that's essentially what they were able to accomplish, was to get this vote done. Should they choose, so in this case it was a little bit more clear on what people were voting compared to the Scottish one. It was vote leave or vote remain. Vote to leave the European Union and just go on their own, or vote to remain in the EU. That is the choice that people are making. A few of the key issues, again, I mentioned it, but I'll list it again here just because it's so it's clear. The cost of membership. The membership was costing the UK billions per year to be part of the EU. Were they getting enough benefit out of it for simply the money that they were putting in to be part of the EU? That was a big question. And so people were many debates over a couple of years were what do we get out of it? Is it worth it? How much does it actually cost us? They do have to be subject to a lot of EU laws and regulations. So everything from safety regulations for children's furniture to any number of things. And the question here was, does this help or does it hurt UK business? Do we need the free trade, or would we be better if we had the option of using tariffs to protect our own industries? Because some of our industries getting demolished by countries in, say, Eastern Europe being able to bring in cheap goods into the country? We hear these arguments a lot in the U.S. as well. Immigration is obviously an issue. The free movement is a core tenet of the EU, and you don't have to have a visa to live and work in another EU country. And so there was a big debate over, who, does the UK need that influx of people, or would the job market be better if they could control their own immigration policies? That was a big debate. And then the other big sort of looming one, not so much it's hard to put your finger on it kind of debate, but the point of the EU is bureaucracy. Like, they constantly seek to control more and more and more. And so is it your country? The question of, is it your country if someone else can tell you what to do within your own borders? That was a big question that people were, is your country sovereign anymore? You're choosing to give up your sovereignty in a lot of cases, and so that was rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. And so the vote, a bit closer than the one that was in the Scottish referendum, and this was in 2016. 51.9% vote to leave the EU, so no longer be part of the European Union. 48% vote to remain, and so that's about 17.4 million to 16.1. So again, it's clear but less dramatic of a win for the leave side of things. And so this is a map that it doesn't break it down super specific, but it's breaking it down by county here. So you see all the little counties. Are they majority leave? So more than half are for leaving the EU, or more than half remaining. And so in Scotland, where we just saw that, the SNP is in strong control and more people favor EU membership in a lot of ways, then that vote's almost solid to remain in the EU. Northern Ireland, about looks like about half and half. Obviously, it depends on where you live specifically. And then England was the big question. How is England going to vote? And basically, it was major population areas voted to remain, these yellow dots throughout England, and then the areas that are more away from major population centers, or just smaller more rural, they all tended to vote for leaving the EU. And there's enough people in that position to be able to push the country towards leaving the EU. And here it is by here it is by component of the UK. So England was the strongest, obviously, 53% of the vote to 46, and then Wales 52 to 47, and then Northern Ireland 44 or 55% voting to remain in the EU, and then Scotland being the strongest at 62%. When you look at the demographics, age played out the same way it did in the Scottish referendum. The older you were, generally, the more likely you were to vote to leave the EU. The younger you were, the more likely you were to stay in the EU. So younger people preferred the option of, keeping the ease of movement and all that within the EU. Older people wanting to, protect what they already have. They felt like maybe they were losing something by staying in the EU, and so they vote to leave. The 35 to 44 range, somewhere in here, was where it hit about the 50-50 mark. So these were interesting little points as well here. So of the 30 areas with the most elderly people, 27 voted to leave. So skews older, obviously, we saw that. The lowest levels of higher education, fewest graduates, they call it, 28 of the 30 voted to leave. So it skews people who are not attaining as much in education. It's skewed that way. And if you identify as English over British, then you tended to vote to leave because you preferred to maintain that identity as much as possible. And so 30 out of 30 of those areas voted to leave. So these are just indicators of where people are in their thought process. And this, interestingly, isn't the first time that the British have had a referendum on this topic. They actually, in 1975, came back together. This was 2 years after they joined the EU. And basically, they just decided, you know what, let's just get a feel for everybody and see if we think that this is beneficial enough to stick with it. Because, 2 years in, it would not be as difficult to extract yourself from the situation as it would be 47 years in. And so the 75 referendum, 67.2% of the population, that's a resounding yes to staying in or remain in the EU, rather than the 32% who voted to leave. So, again, the population areas, Scotland, the vote is actually quite similar, but just the way that it played out. Let's see. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong side here. Apologies. Yeah, so the vast majority, every section here, say for up here, I was looking at the wrong side, is voting to remain, at least heavily